We're just going to give Al another minute or two to join and then get rolling, since he's the chair.
And I know he knows he's the chair too.
The chairman's never late, right?
We might have to fire him and put Joanne back on there.
No way. I did that.
No, actually, I was texting Jamie Neal because he asked me a question, but I'll text Al.
We're just waiting for Al Parker to join us, but everyone's online ready to go.
Oh, okay. I won't text him. Hi, Al.
Good morning. Just having a little trouble figuring out how to sign on. My apologies.
No
Ditto.
worries.
I think Zoom did an update. I had an issue too.
Well, now that the chair is here, you have a quorum of the committee, Al, so you can get rolling whenever you choose.
Okay, I'm not hearing you very well, Brian. Can you? Again?
Sorry about that.
Oh,
You have a quorum of the Water Supply Bank Committee, so when you are ready, we can get rolling.
okay, well, let's call the meeting to order, and I'll turn the meeting over to you, Mr. Patton.
Okay, first thing on the agenda is introduction and attendance. You have 3 members of the Water Supply Bank Committee. Yourself, the Chair Al Barker, Marc Gibbs, and Brian Olmstead. And then you also have 3 other members of the Water Resource Board in attendance, 4 other members, excuse me. You have Jeff Raybould, Joanne Cole-Hansen, Dean Stevenson, Pat McMahon. And then Jennifer will make sure to note the staff and guests that are in attendance.
Great.
With that, I'm going to turn the rest of the meeting over to Mary Condon, and she is going to walk through some reports and some discussion on the Water Supply Bank finances.
Welcome, Mary. Go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. Just gonna share the PowerPoint presentation.
Picture, Mary. It's not blue like it was a couple weeks ago.
There we go. Well, good morning. My name is Mary. I am the coordinator for the Water Supply Bank. And I'm just going to do a summary of the annual rental pool transactions for 2020 and 2021 based on the report that is in the meeting materials. Then I'm going to cover a summary of the board's bank operations for 2020 and 2021. Also based on the annual report that I put with the committee meeting materials. And we're going to look at the bank calendar, workloads and priorities, the processing of leases and rentals over those years, hours billed and what that means, volume rented, and then some finances associated with operations. And finally, we will also just talk some more on cost and revenue for the board's bank and the pricing framework that is a continuation of discussions we've been having to close the deficit, and specifically just talking about years 2018 through 2022. And if at any point you have any questions, please interrupt me. So as you're aware, the Water Supply Bank is an exchange market operated by the board through the director of the Department of Water Resources in association with water districts and board-appointed rental committees to facilitate lease and rental water use authorizations to accommodate new and supplemental uses in Idaho. It's operated pursuant to 42-1761 through 42-1766 of Idaho Code and board adopted rules, IDAPA 370203. The board also appoints local committees to facilitate the lease and rental of water use authorizations via water source specific regional rental pools. And the storage water rental pools that we are going to be discussing that exist in Idaho are the Upper Snake, the Boise, the Payette River, as well as reservoirs within the Lake Fork Creek Basin. And then finally, our natural flow rental pool in the Lemhi River Basin. Additionally, Shoshone Bannock tribes operate a tribal water supply bank, but we will not be covering those. This portion again summarizes years 2020 and 2021 of lease and rental transactions reported by the local committees for the rental pools. The Upper Snake is comprised of storage from Henry's, Island Park, Grassy Lake, Jackson, Palisades, Rary, American Falls, Lake Walcott, and Milner Pool. Sorry, I'm gonna have to move my little thing real quick. The storage contents of these reservoirs at 4 million acre feet, of which 8% was leased and rented during 2020, and 10% of this was leased and rented during 2021. Currently, Water District 01 Advisory Committee is the board-appointed local committee authorized to facilitate that Upper Snake rental pool. And I'm just going to show 2020 for each of these different rental pools and just the summaries of what was leased and what was rented according to which pools for Upper Snake. And then their excess use. You can see private pools in the center had 134,000 acre feet leased and rented. So that's a significant amount. And then US Bureau of Reclamation uncontracted was 97,000. Additionally, there's some excess use in 2020 that was paid for in 2021. So each year we get the previous year's excess use if there was any. Of all the rentals that were transacted through 2021 transactions for the Upper Snake, the board's revenue was $653,000. The Boise River rental pool consists of storage from Anderson Ranch, Arrow Rock, Lucky Peak, and Lake Lau. The total storage contents of these 4 reservoirs is just over 1 million acre feet, of which 1% was leased and rented through the Boise rental pool during 2020, and 4% was leased and rented during 2021. Water District 63 Advisory Committee is the board-appointed local committee to facilitate this rental pool. For 2021, we have, again, just some highlights of the transactions that occurred during that year. They did not have any private lease rentals, and US Bureau of Reclamation uncontracted space was 36,000 acre feet. The 10% that was payable to the board for 2021 was $14,000. Next, Payette River Rental Pool for Cascade and Deadwood reservoirs. Total storage content is 800,000 acre feet, of which 22% was leased to the rental pool during 2020, but slightly less was rented during at 175,000 acre feet was rented during that year. Similarly, 18% was leased to the rental pool during 2021, and slightly less was rented during the same year. Water District 65 Advisory Committee is the board-appointed committee to operate that rental pool. And again, a summary of just their 2021 transactions. And from the Payette, you can see US Bureau of Reclamation, their uncontracted space was 95,000 acre feet. And the revenue that was payable to the board for their 10% was 65,000. Does anybody have any questions so far? Okay, Lake Fork Rental Pool, storage from Little Payette Lake, Brown Pond, and I'm sorry, I cannot pronounce that, Cruikshank Reservoir. Authorized storage of 24,000 acre feet, and 1% was leased and rented during 2020, 2% during 2021. The Water District 65, that is not good. The Water District 65 K Advisory Committee is the board-appointed committee to authorize to facilitate Lake Fork rental pool transactions. Obviously, they just have a very small rental pool, and their in-basin use was just 489 acre feet leased and rented, and revenue from that was $516 in 2021. And finally, our Lemhi River rental pool, there is no lease or rental transactions to report or any revenues there, and they do natural flow. They do have some active rentals for indefinite lease rental for minimum stream flow. And the final thing, for each of these rental pools being board appointed, they run 5-year terms on their appointments. And that will be May of 2024 when we will seek new appointments for each of these rental pools. Now on to, go ahead, sir.
By appointments, you mean members of the advisory committees, or what do you mean appointments?
The actual committee which operates the rental pool, they'll re-seek to gain authorization to operate that rental pool. So, yeah.
So we have to renew that this year.
For 2024 in May, yes. The last time that was done was in May of 2019.
Okay, got it.
Al, this is Jeff, excuse me. Do we have to wait until May to do that? Could we do that sooner?
Would you like to?
Yeah.
Yeah, would you like to do it in March?
Go ahead, Mary.
I'm so sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. We could do it in March if you would prefer.
Yeah, we can visit about that a little bit. I just wonder if it wouldn't be better to get those appointments made sooner rather than later.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, thank you.
The next portion of this is on the boards bank for years 2020 and 2021. This is our water supply bank calendar, which lists the types of transactions and priorities that we hold for these based on a year. We have it split up beginning in June and running through May because it helps to show the high quantity of high priorities that we have in the winter. So it's centered. And from November 1st through March 15th, that's when we typically have additional staff assisting from water allocations, where we could have 6 to 9 additional employee IDWR staff assisting with that. And then from April 1st through October 15th is typically when it's just the coordinator and specialists, as well as some approvals by the water rights section supervisor. And our application intake occurs as they're received. So we don't have that on the calendar, it just happens. But our application processing are the top 2 lines for rentals and leases. We start leases earlier so we can bulk up our supply. And then November 2nd is when we start processing priority rentals. Just before this, we're also issuing lessor payments for water right owners who had their rights rented during that year. And we have also been processing lease releases. So that's for water right owners that have their rights leased to the bank that no longer want it in the bank. We'll get those pulled out if they're not rented so that we don't have supply that isn't going to be able to get rented. In continuation of that calendar, this top graph shows the workload that the coordinator and specialist are performing in those high priority months where we are requesting rental fee reminders. So in 2021, we sent 111 letters on 238 water rights. We issued 111 warrant check payments for 225 water rights. And what's important to note about some of these is that they may have multiple lease contracts, but the same owner. And then rental conclusion notices, we issued 47 letters on 184 water rights. And lease conclusion notices, we issued 87 letters on 256 water rights. And all of those are right as we're also gearing up to start processing for the next calendar year leases and rentals.
So, Mary,
In comparison, go ahead.
Al Barker here. On these reminders and notices, that is there a I don't want to denigrate it here, but is there a push button mechanism so that we've got this located in the calendar and the computer will spit out these notices, or do they all have to be prepared by hand by your staff?
Thank you for that question. It is not automated. This is something that the coordinator and specialist will follow on the calendar, and we have to query this data out of our software and then line by line match up values to ensure that they're correct. We have, for example, our warrant checks that issues a line item for every water right. And so we're matching those amounts up to the correct values and double checking rentals to make sure that we got all of the owners of the rights in there. So we're cross-checking this as well.
Yeah, I understand we need to be careful about paying money or not paying enough money, but just the notices, it seems like we ought to be able to have our system be able to kick out those notices to people without you all having to go through the entire record of each one of these rentals. I don't know if that's something that we need to talk to IT about or the director about, but it seems like that would make things go a little quicker, smoother, and less costly.
Yeah, yes, sir. Yeah, we do have an option in our software for templates. We've been working on those, and it would require quite a bit of software enhancements to be able to automate that, especially to get multiple notices on the same letters. So we're not generating 5 letters to, for example, Idaho Power, when it could have been condensed onto 1 letter. So that is something that we're trying to look at for efficiency, definitely.
Okay, go ahead. Sorry to interrupt.
No, you have great points. Thank you. So this graph that's directly underneath the transactions is the board bank service hours. And so this is a comparison of total hours that are billed to the bank, and then that portion that is for the coordinator and the specialist. And then the line that goes across is total applications processed. And so a couple of notes to make on the hours by the coordinator and specialist. In 2017, the coordinator was, my predecessor was by himself until September of that year. That's when I came on as the specialist. So there's not a full coordinator and specialist hours billed that year. And then in 2021, that is when we had quite a bit of turnover, and my predecessor left the bank. And so I was by myself for a few months in that as well. But the difference between the hours billed by the coordinator and specialist and the total hours, those are going to be the hours that are dedicated by other IDWR staff who are assisting processing. This next 2 charts, these help to show some trends, and this is for 1 calendar year in 2021. The top one is application processing. So these are leases and rentals and when they're executed. And then the table below are the hours billed. So this helps to kind of show where we're getting an increase in billing by additional staff and the amount of workload that they're taking on. There is a peak in July for processing, and that's just because we're finally getting mailings that we had already sent out requesting signature for new contracts and rentals and getting those back in. But it just also helps to highlight on the bottom graph the amount of additional hours that other IDWR staff are assisting with the bank, all the way to the right, beginning in November and then coming back around into March and April. These 2 are to show the trend between the applications that are being processed and then revenue. So beginning with the top, we can see from 2011 through 2021, we had an increase in water right leases and rentals processed, peaking out in 2015. And part of this is because our leases went up because in 2010, that's when we stopped doing indefinite leases and we restricted them to 5-year maximum terms unless there was additional approval by the board for case-by-case leases. And so we had expiring leases. There was a big uptick in the number that we were receiving. It began coming down all the way through 2018 and 19 for both leases and rentals, and then has been coming back up since then through 2021 with a steady gain. Similarly, in the graph below it for total financial transactions by year, the top green bar represents the revenue which is generated. So we see that it is increasing from 2011 into 2015, comparable with those additional leases. It begins coming down through mellowing out in 2017 and 2018, and then begins increasing again through 2021. So this is a great comparison of the more we can get in, the higher our revenue is. It does not help explain the bottom part of the bottom graph where we have operational costs and our deficit. So our operational costs are our hours billed. And the revenue that we bring in, the difference ends up with that deficit. There's also rental rate increases. So we had $14 an acre foot through 2012, and then it went up to $17 an acre foot through 2017. And then 2018 through 2022, it went up to $20 per acre foot. And then for 23, we just increased it to $23 an acre foot. And we don't have an additional step up after that one.
So Mary, just on those, just to confirm, those rates are the Nez Perce settlement agreement, or whatever we call the settlement that was approved back in whenever that was, 2005.
Correct, yes, sir.
We're not
It
doing,
is based on,
yeah, the water board hasn't done anything to change those rates. Nor has the water supply bank. That's just what's established by that agreement.
correct. That is based off of that agreement, yes, sir.
Al, this is Jeff. Question. But the water board at the time just mirrored those rates of the Nez Perce settlements, water rights settlement, that we could change those rates for other rentals in the bank, couldn't we?
That's a good question, Jeff. I assume we could, for at least for anybody other than reclamation who wanted to
Did I
rent.
lose everybody?
Can you hear me, Jeff?
Yeah, I can hear you. Can you
Oh.
hear me?
Yeah.
I'm just wondering if that's something we could adjust. Seems like we had a conversation about that at one time, and I don't know, is that built into the rules? Do you have to amend the rules to do that? Or what's the procedure if you wanted to change the rental rate?
Jeff and Al, I'll answer that question. The board at the time, you're right, they tied the water supply bank rental rate to the Nez Perce term sheet rates, but you're not required to leave them there. At the time, it was a convenient rate schedule to tie the water supply bank rentals to.
But Brian, don't we have to leave it there for flow-og water?
So most of the flow-og water, Al, comes out of the rental pools. And that,
This is, okay, no, you're right. This is, okay, go ahead.
and the Bell Rapids water, that is counted toward flow-og does have its own separate payment structure.
That's right. Okay.
So all of the Bureau of Reclamation water would be separate from what Mary's talking about here. And I guess to further answer Jeff's question, no, these rates are not tied to rule. The board has complete discretion over how you set the rental rates, or I guess the amount of the rental rate in the water supply bank.
Thank you, Brian.
So, Brian, Mary, is there any involvement by the water supply bank in the rental pool system that Brian was just mentioning? Or does your work exclusively for these natural flow rentals?
Thank you. Thank you for that question. So I directly watch over the board's bank, and then the advisory committees directly over the rental pools. So anything that we would be applying to the board's bank would not affect rental pools.
Okay. Well, I was just wondering about your time. That was all.
I do, you're talking about billed hours?
Yeah.
I do spend some billed hours assisting water masters for rental pools with updating their procedures or getting their annual report data to report then back to you. But that amount of time in comparison to my total hours billed for a year is probably only 2 or 3% at most.
Okay. Thank you.
So continuing on with 2021, kind of an overview of operational costs and revenue for the board's bank and kind of what we were seeing in 2020, 2021. The chart on the left with Idaho, and we have gradient colors and some numbers to show the actual volume that was rented in 2021 by the board's bank, within the board's bank. And Basin 2, I actually just kind of have an additional number that I'd like to point out down in the bottom left-hand corner of the state. So 21,000 acre feet. That is the most volume that is rented per basin, and it has been the leader for volume rented per basin for about the last 10 years. And so on our right-hand side, we have annual averages. The 5 years from 2017 through 2021, where 70% of the volume which is rented during those years was from 5 basins, where I have a 6th one. They kind of tie when you look at percentages, but the Snake River again had 20,000 acre feet average, 30% of total volume rented over those 5 years. And then Basin 21 for Henry's Fork, Basin 35 in the ESPA American Falls, and that's going to be groundwater. Blackfoot River Basin comes in at number 4 at 8% of the volume rented. And then Raft River and Bigwood River Basins, they kind of tie for that 5th place at 5% of total volume over that 5-year span. In comparison, I also have the annual averages for years 2014 through 18. Again, Snake River had the highest volume. They did 25%. And then Henry's Fork, again, number 2. But Blackfoot was number 3 and American Falls was number 4. So they just switched places. And then Basin 61 for Mountain Home, it was actually number 5. And with 8%. And so all 5 of those basins made up 65% of the annual volume that was rented for those years.
Hey, Mary, this is Brian. I'm a little confused on the category ESPA/American Falls. Where ESPA is the groundwater and American Falls, does that mean reservoir storage or?
No, it's just the area within the state, and I can clarify this for future reports. This was how my predecessor had labeled this, and so I just kept it consistent just for continuity purposes. But the Basin 35 around American Falls is that groundwater that is just above the reservoir. And it's not inclusive of any storage or surface water. It's just groundwater that's in that basin.
So Mary, do you have a breakdown of surface and groundwater leases and rentals as well?
I do not, but that is something that I've been looking at doing. We do have several years where we've looked at the volumes by basin. And so I could go into those same spreadsheets and then parse them out by groundwater versus surface water.
And the reason I'm asking that question is, does it, and maybe you're going to get to this later, but is there a difference in the kind of analysis, not the kind, but the amount of time it takes to figure out whether or not these groundwater rentals or surface water rentals have potential injury and therefore can be approved? I don't mean rent, I mean the leases. Can they be, is one more labor intensive than the other?
Right, thank you for that question. Just looking between surface water and groundwater, there's not a real difference in renting either or if I'm thinking about a straightforward irrigation. But when we will look at some of the ways in which these could cause longer review times. So when our groundwater is within a groundwater management area, that's when it becomes more labor intensive for review to ensure that there's not going to be an injury. But just looking at surface versus groundwater, it doesn't get into that until we get into regional area of the state where that's being rented, where it becomes causing more time to review.
Okay, thank you.
One more for me, Mary. The Mountain Home Basin, is that all surface water? Is that surface and groundwater rentals there?
That's going to be groundwater only.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. And you know, one of the things that we the specialist and I looked at was, of these 5 basins, how much water was left. So were they fully appropriated or was there some water left? And I can't speak to the Mountain Home Basin because we didn't look at that one. But in 2021, our top 5, they only rented about 50% of what was leased. So there was volume still available for rental. What I haven't looked at and I have thought about looking at is some of the areas where we have high demand and we're running out, how much more, or how close were we? And I'm thinking more specifically like Basin 35, Basin 35, 29, those were 50% leased and rented. So there was some left over, but some of our other areas that aren't making it into the top 5, is it because there wasn't enough supply available?
Can you go back to that other slide just real quick? Does that mean
Yes.
in the Payette, you rented 9.8 acre feet of natural flow and that was it?
Yes.
Okay, nice to have extra water, huh?
Yeah, yes. Yeah, that's a good point. So a couple of these basins have 0 acre feet, and that's because at some point prior to 2017, they did have rentals in that area, and they haven't been rented in the last 5 years. So they're represented by 0. If there isn't any volume associated with a basin, it's because we haven't had a rental there within the last 12 years. So those are some good points to look at. Yeah. These 2 graphs help to show volume rented compared to revenue. So beginning with the top one, we have rented volume by year from 2012 through 2021. And one of the important parts about this that I would just like to clarify is that the numbers that are represented by the volume rented in each of these years is total volume rented, not total. It doesn't consider stacked combined limits. So when we factor in combined limits, we are actually charging for less acre feet than what's in there. And I'm going to give you more of a specific example so you understand what I'm saying here. We have a rental in 2021 where somebody had rented Basin 1 and Basin 35 water. So Basin 1 was the surface, Basin 35 was the groundwater. but all three rights that they rented each had 900 acre feet. And altogether, they can only use 900 acre feet. So we would only charge them for the 900 acre feet, in which could actually be used that year that they're renting, not 2,700 acre feet. So our rented volume by year would include that whole 2,700 acre feet. But the revenue in which we get from that volume is based on combined limits. So when we continuing on though, our rented volume by year and compared to our bank revenue in the bottom graph, you can see where our revenue increases when our volume rented increases each year, and then it kind of comes down. So we had a peak in 2015. It came down in 2018 to 19, and there could be some offset there for the number of leases offsetting that revenue. And then it comes up again in 2021, where our volume is coming back up in rentals as well.
Hey, Al, this is Jeff. I got to back up just a second. If that rental, there were 3 rentals for 900, but they only used 900. So was the lease was only for 900, or was the lease for 2,700 as well? Were there 3 900 acre foot leases?
The lease would have been combined limited to 900 acre feet as well. So the lease would have had all 3 rights because they're stacked. That's how that they were licensed. So each water right was developed for 900 acre feet, but total they could only use 900 acre feet a year. So because on the lease side, it's limited to 900 acre feet, on the rental side, it's also limited to the maximum allowable per year.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Yes. I knew that was going to be a bit of a confusing point, but I think it is important to understand that you can't look at 71,000 acre feet rented and multiply it times the rental rate and expect to get the revenue that was generated. It just doesn't work out mathematically that way. We actually have to go into each rental and find out exactly what volume they're paying for.
Hey, Mary, this is Brian again. So these rentals are exclusive of the BOR Nez Perce rentals, though.
Yeah, so Brian,
These-
these is water bank and those are rental.
Okay.
And so the question though.
These are just
following up on
rentals of-
Brian, is
These are
that
just rentals of the water board
right?
bank. And
But does that include the high lift pumping at shoot, what's the name of that place, Brian?
Oh, yes, it does include, no,
Bell Rapids.
it does not include that portion, that 60,000 acre feet. It doesn't include that, no.
And do you do anything with the Bell Rapids rentals, or is that something the water bank? Do we do anything with that?
We do. So we did a 30-year lease rental on that was executed back in 2005 and consistent with that Nez Perce term sheet. It's just something that we're not tracking with the rest of the board's operation of the board's bank. So
and the funds from that?
that was a one-time.
Upfront payment.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Yeah, that was a one-time upfront. Yep.
Mr. Chairman, that was the Bureau of Reclamation paid it up front over about the 3 first years of the agreement. And then the water board had to turn around and repay those funds to the legislature. That was the deal. That was as the legislature approved it at the time.
Well, they've been generous recently, so we can't hold that against them. Go ahead, Mary. Sorry.
That's okay. I love these questions. This is really great. This is one of our hard spreadsheets, but I do have it kind of broken up, color coded, where the top portion in blue, this is going to be pertinent to leases. And this shows actual costs versus revenue for years 2017 through 2021. Next to the line for our plus, that's the revenue, which was received from rentals. And above that, it's a breakdown of the percent of time, the hours billed, and how many were processed. And then right below that, the contracts that we're managing and the hours billed for the contracts that we're managing. And that cost, there is no revenue for managing leases. And then our total loss gain for leases as it pertains to the revenue versus the costs that they incur. The center portion is rentals with the green highlights. Again, it's broken out first with our rental applications that we process. The line with the plus, that is our revenue from admin fees. And then just below that, our active rentals that we're managing and the cost to manage. And then our loss and gain. And then it has a comparison of that rental volume. And then about what the dollar per acre foot average is. So the rental volume that's in that line, that's based on the same that I showed you earlier for volume rented across. When I get into the next the last third of this presentation, we're going to look at what the actual volume was. So it'll get closer to the actual dollar per acre foot that we would expect from rental rates. The last third of this spreadsheet with our equals, this is our cost of leases and rentals, and then our revenue and what the total lease gain is for leases and rentals. And then our communication, coordination, and research and development. So when we break up transaction management, the amount of hours that are billed for actually communicating, not billable to a specific lease or rental, but general inquiries or the data in which we're looking at to report this information back to you. Whenever we are drafting proposals to OITS for improvements for bank processing, research and development. Remington and Justin did a lot of work with writing some SQL query reports to help work around some data, and which makes my life easier in the long run as well. And that was under research and development. And then the total CNC and R&D costs for that last arrow line. Again, there's no revenue for this. And then the very last block portion, that's going to be total hours billed, and what portion of that was just the coordinator and specialist. And then our average annual hourly cost, the operating cost, that's total hours billed, and then the total gain loss each year. So you see this typically through that graph, not in a tabulated form. And so this takes all of the information that we've talked about thus far and just puts it into a spreadsheet that tracks where those costs and revenues are in relation for the board's bank operating.
So Mary, on this chart, there's a fair amount of funds over the years for communication, coordination, R&D. Is that
Correct.
something that you expect will continue into the future, or is that going to remain constant, or is that going to increase or decline? Because it looks like that accounts for a significant amount of the difference between income and revenue. Sorry, revenue and cost.
Yeah, no, you make a great point. None of our costs are going to stay, none of the percentages for the hours billed are going to stay very consistent, including our communication, coordination, and research and development. So, for example, in 2022, the amount of time that I spent preparing for the proposed changes to the water supply bank rules. That was increased time that I was spending with research and development and communications coordination. So that was an increase on there, which isn't reported on here. We end at 2021. I was just giving this as an example. I would say that it would stay probably about 30% of what our total cost is, as an average for each next 5 years. I don't expect it to go down, and I expect it to go up if we want to get any improvements or efficiencies.
Okay, got it.
Do we have any more questions about this complex accounting page?
So I don't know if you're going to get into this in a bit or not, but one of the discussions we've historically had is it seems like the cost of managing a rental, if it's 1 acre foot versus 100 acre feet or 1,000 acre feet, there's not a lot of difference in the cost associated with handling those administratively.
Mhm.
And have you tried to identify how many of these rentals are for a small amount or a large amount, and whether or not we should be looking at having a scaled rental charge based upon, or a minimum charge based upon the size of the rentals?
Right. Yeah, thank you for that question. We will definitely get into that in the last third of this presentation. We'll look at what is driving up some of these costs for leases and rentals and for processing applications and managing them. We'll look at some of the complexities that are in there. And then to address more specifically what your question was, that difference in small rentals and large rentals and what percent they make up of our total transaction management each year.
Okay, well, sorry to jump the gun on you.
No, that's okay. You're leading me up to everything. I appreciate it. This graph right here was something that my predecessor had put together without the call outs. It was a projection for finding targets on operational costs and increasing revenue and what that might look like based off of previous trends. And so I've added these call outs to show what we actually achieved in years 2019, 2020, and 2021 on this 5-year forward-looking scale, where now we're kind of getting into the middle of this. So it helps us to see, are we trending? Are we not meeting kind of where we thought we were going to be based on this forecast when it was drafted back in 2018? So for years 2019, we did not meet the operating revenue that we thought we would, but we did exceed it in 2020 and 2021. And similarly, in 2019, we did not have the costs that we thought that we would. And we didn't meet the cost in 2020 or 2021. So that's good. So our revenue went up in 2 of those years higher than we expected, and our costs were lower than we thought that they would be based on trends in those 3 years. And then that leaves us our deficit. So our deficit has actually been half to a third of what we expected that it might be in 2019, 20, and 2021. And so this, like I said, this just kind of forecasts and then compares what actually happened to what that forecasting was based on trends. Any questions about anything so far?
So I'm going to make an assumption, Brian, that the deficit comes out of IDWR's account. Is that wrong?
That's correct, Mr. Chairman. It's made up out of basically IDWR's general fund appropriation.
Okay, Mary, keep going.
Thank you.
Hey, Al, but that's all built into the number of FTEs that the department has and all of that, correct? Yeah, okay, thank you.
I mean, I guess that's right, Brian.
Yes. So the fees collected go into what we call the fee account, which does pay for certain employees' salaries. We have been trying to make the water supply bank revenue neutral over time and haven't quite got there. But yeah, if it is not revenue neutral, then that difference is made up out of the general fund portion of the department's budget. Now, Jeff is right. That is accounted to employees, and each employee has a certain amount of general fund or other funds associated with them. But our goal has been to try and get revenue neutral on the bank so that those funds can be used for other water right or department processes like transfers or ownership changes or whatever the water rights folks, need to have done.
Okay, this last portion of the presentation is going to be a deeper dive into those costs and the revenue that's generated. And we're going to look at years 2018 through 2022. So you're going to see some new numbers. The top graph is the hours that are billed. So we were talking about how much time is dedicated to each specific task or function within the water supply bank. And for 2020 and 2021, I directly solicited those people who billed their hours to the bank for what percent of time they felt that they spent in each of these areas so that I could get the most accurate data possible. And then that final percent that's in each of those years for each function is that average for everybody who billed their hours during that year. So that's why you'll see there's some difference in the amount of time spent between each year because we have more leases or more rentals or more work that we're doing through communications and research, those types of things. But on average, on the very right-hand side, processing lease applications takes 25%, processing rentals 32% of the time. So 57% of the hours billed are for processing applications. Then we have our managing of leases and rentals. So together, those are 17% of the time spent. And then our communications and coordination averaged 12% of our time for those 5 years. And research and development averaged 14% of the time for those 4 years. So you can see the difference between 2021 and 2022 for communication, coordination, research, and development. My priorities had switched in 2022 when I was talking about earlier. I was working on more of getting the updates to the rules. I was doing some different coordinating. I was training the new specialists. So some of those tasks are a lot different. And typically, the coordinator and specialists are billing more hours in those two functions than other IDWR staff. We can take these percentages and then compare them in the graph below for how much they actually take up for the total amount of hours billed for costs of leases and costs of rentals. And so the top portion of all of those is rentals. The bottom portion is leases. The percentage of hours billed, it's going to look a little bit different than our top table because I've actually split them out, leases versus rentals. And then also communications and coordination and research and development don't generate a revenue. And so I combined communication coordination with leases, and I combined research development with rentals so that I got almost a 50-50 between those two. And I'll show you why here in a little bit. Our top table is actually taking our revenue that we received for leases and for rentals and what percent it makes up of our operating costs to find our deficit. And so 2018, you can see 44% deficit, where only 40% of the amount that we needed was generated by rental fees and 16% of the amount we needed was generated by lease fees. And then we get through 2021, rental fees covered 56% of what we needed to cover operating costs. We had a smaller deficit at 15%, and leases made up almost 30% of what we needed to cover operating costs. And then we can compare this to the graph below. I bring this up a couple of times so that you have something to relate these to, but our financial transactions per year, we're comparing that revenue that we're generating to that operational cost to see that difference in deficit. So if you want to assign a number to a percent, a dollar amount to a percent, you can do it between these two graphs. And since this is one of the first times you're seeing 2022, you'll notice that our operating costs increased quite significantly in 2022, and our rental revenue and lease revenue went down. And so we actually increased our deficit by almost threefold from the previous year. I'm going to focus on leases right now. This top table is leased rights per contract comparison. So what we did is we looked at, on a lease contract, how many rights were actually on a lease and what that made of the total approvals made for each year. So for example, in the middle 2020, we leased in 329 water rights, and on average had 1.7 water rights per lease contract. But we had a lease contract with 24 water rights on it because they were stacked. So those water rights can't be separated. They're all for the same place of use, same diversion. They can't be unbound from each other. And what's important about showing you this information is that our lease application fee is $250 per water right, or a max of $500 when they're stacked. So with the same example, this lease contract with 24 water rights on it only had a lease filing fee of $500. The table below is the filing fees that we received in the very first column based on our current filing fees. And then some scenarios for if that lease filing fee was increased, where would that put us as far as revenue for each of those years? And then if the number is bold, that means that that's the price that it would need to be in order to cover the deficit that year. So for 2018, if the lease fee was $750 per water right, a max of $1,500, of the exact same filing fees that we got in 2018, it would now generate $144,000, and that would have almost met 2018 operating costs. Whereas in 2020, we would just need to increase it by $375 and $750 maximum because our deficit was much lower in 2020. and it would have only needed 99,000. But you can also see that we had more lease filing fees beginning in that year that we collected. So it started off with 66,000 compared to 2018, we only collected $48,000. And again, since we're introducing, go ahead.
Hey, Mary Brian, yeah. So that 200 current fee, the 250, 500, how long have we been on that fee?
To 2010
Okay, so
is
it's
when
been, it's been 13 years since we made an increase in that fee then.
correct. And that fee is specified in rule.
With no adjustment for time or inflation or anything.
Correct.
Okay.
This is Mark. I've got a question.
Go ahead, Mark.
You have a two-tiered structure there. It looks to me like the 500 and 1,000 or whatever. But one of these applications with the 24 stacked rights, could there be a third column in there for not a third column, but a third structure, depending on how many rights there were stacked? And if so, would that generate enough more revenue to help the situation that we're trying to fix?
Right. Thank you for that question. So if the board wanted to restructure lease filing fees, that could be a consideration of limiting how many stacked rights that covers, or increasing the fees per additional right past a maximum number of water rights. So if we say that the max fee of 500 only applies to the first 10 stacked rights, and then an additional fee for every right after that, or something. But that is something that I would need to take more time analyzing and a little bit more direction on what the board would want to see from that. And this committee, what you would want to see analyzed from those data sets, where that line is that you would like to see.
So Mary,
Mr.
yeah,
Sure.
go ahead, Brian.
I was just going to make a comment that may help Mark's question. With the water supply bank, the board actually collects, there's actually two different fees collected. There's the lease application filing fee, which Mary is showing here. And that is a $250 per application fee, or capped at $500 if there's multiple rights included. There's also a rental fee per acre foot collected. The lease application filing fee is set by rule, so that would require legislative approval to change. The rental rate is within the board's discretion to change, and that is the rate that we have tied, that you have tied to the NESPERS term sheet rates. That is within your discretion to change, and you can change that at any time you choose. So that may help answer Mark's question, I'm hoping.
Thank you.
So Mary, Sal again, the question of what effort needs to go into these analysis of leases and analysis of rentals. So when the water is leased, do you do a injury analysis, or just when it's rented?
Thank you for that question, Al. So our review for leases doesn't include an injury analysis so far as, will idling this water cause any injury to others, or is the amount that they're offering such that it would cause an injury because it's unproportionate, or it's leaving something behind which could be enlarged without these. So there is a very shallow or very small, in comparison to rentals, look at injury, but we do consider injury in them.
Okay, and so let's just take this one rental in 2020 where there are 24 stacked rights or on at least one application or overlapping rights, let's say it that way.
Mhm.
So how much effort is it to evaluate that for the lease when you take in as compared to, let's say, the lease in the year before where there was 11 rights as was the maximum that was offered? Is that twice as much work or is it the same amount of work?
Right. I would say that the work load increases in analyzing leased rights when, and I'll get to this, I believe, I have it in a different report. So when they only offer a portion, that's when we actually get a higher lease review cost. So if they had 24 water rights, which were stacked, but they only offered 5 acres of the 20 acres, that's going to cause considerably more time to analyze. Additionally, when we have, for example, I gave earlier where we had a surface basin 1 water right stacked with basin 35 groundwater rights. That analysis is going to be a little bit deeper than when we only consider 3 water rights, which are stacked from the same source. So it doesn't necessarily have to do with the number of water rights that are on there as much as it has to do with how they're offering them to the bank and if they're all from the same source.
Okay, thank you.
Yes. And just want to also mention on this bottom table for the lease filing fees, this also takes into consideration the rental admin fees which were received. So this isn't covering the total operating costs. This is operating costs minus admin fees that we collected as revenue, and then what that difference is. So it's not expecting lease fees to cover the total operating cost. It's what portion of the operating costs after rentals are taken out of there. This next table is just kind of the same information, summarizing where we have the actual costs of leases, that hours billed per year. And then we coupled communication and coordination costs with it because it doesn't generate a revenue. It's at 12, 13% a year. So it's with it so that our total cost for leases and CNC is about 45% of our operating costs. And then right underneath it, the revenue, this is if we applied a lease application filing fee that was higher, if we increased it. The second line for if partial 500 max, this is what I was talking about or alluded to, where if somebody leases in only 5 acres of 20 acres, that costs us more money processing that lease application. So what if we charged higher fees for only receiving a portion of a water right versus the flat filing across whether it's a portion or not? And this would be comparable to when somebody files a notice and change of ownership with the department. It's $25 if they aren't splitting this water right, but if it's only a portion, the price then goes to $100 per water right. So knowing that splitting a water right takes a higher cost is already considered in other application processing with the department. This is just another way we could look at it for the bank. And then it also compares those other increases in a flat fee for applications, the number of applications we received, and then below it, lease maintenance fee. We talked about this last year when we were kind of looking at different alternatives for pricing on how to cover that maintenance cost each year for leases. And what if we imposed a $50 per lease contract maintenance fee to help cover those costs of managing them each year, and that revenue that would be generated. We have, 500 active leases at the end of 2018, and we got up to 678 and 675 active contracts in 2019 and 20. And so everything that's occurring with those leases while they're active for their term incurs a maintenance cost. And so applying a maintenance fee would increase revenue by that amount. And then our last line is, what is the current lease revenue? Again, it only comes from that $250 per water right, max of $500 water right lease application filing fee. And so we get 48,000 in 2018, and we only achieved 49,000 in 2022. We had less applications in 2022 and therefore less filing fees. And then the 22% in the far right, that represents the revenue to operating cost total. So that revenue only made up just over 20% of the total operating costs of the board's bank. We're going to get into rental applications. This chart just shows when we're receiving rental applications in a calendar year, starting with our November 1st and prior priority rentals. Have a 5-year comparison for each of those, where in 2019 and 2022, we actually received the most applications in November or prior to that November 1st cutoff than any of the other years. But I also have percentages. So in December of each of the 5 years, we were never getting more than 50% of all applications that we ended up getting by the end of the year. So in 2018, we'd only received less than 30% of all the applications. And in 2022, we'd only received 40% of the applications that we would get by the end of the year. Again, we only have additional staff assisting from water allocations until around March 15th to the end of March. And so when we look at March percentages, we only still have 60 to just less than 80% of all the rental applications by the end of March. So we are already pulling folks away for other application processing away from the bank. At the same time, we're still receiving rental applications in. And so the last of these filings that haven't been reviewed yet, those are on the coordinator and the specialist to get finalized by the end of the year or the requested rental term. And then as you can see, we're still receiving applications in May all the way through December in some years with an immediate requested start date.
So Mary, this is probably not a question for you. It's a question for the board to discuss, but it just seems to me like, or discuss with the director, it seems to me like March and April are pretty important times for people who may not have thought they needed to rent water, but looking at the water supply that's available in their system, they might say, oh man, I really need some water this year. And that they may not have had anticipated in November and or prior to November 1st. And so maybe there needs to be some discussion about, is there a way to leave an additional IDWR employee or two available during that March and April timeframe to help handle these new applications that are coming in? I know there's been people that have been extremely frustrated that they discovered they needed something done and we just can't get to it. And if we can find a way to make that happen, that would be helpful to the water users. But again, that's probably not a question for you. It's a question for the board to talk about.
Al, this is Shelley Keene, and I could speak to that a little bit. So the reason that we have staff members transitioning away from working on bank matters and working on other things after the March, April timeframe each year is that we still have a water right licensing workload, which requires beneficial use field examinations that we need staff to have the field season to address. And so it's been important to the water rights section in the state office that does both of those things to work on the bank as much as they can from that November through March or April timeframe, and then transition over to water right licensing, and then to get back to bank work later in the fall. So that's why that occurs. Now, a year and a half ago, we had authorization from the legislature for 15 new positions in the department. One of those positions was a principal water resource agent position for the water rights section that would be dedicated to working in the water supply bank. And we have not been able to fill that position. It's been part of our ongoing challenge right now, reporting up to me of the 88 positions, 17 are vacant, so almost 20% vacancy rate, and it's been tough for us to recruit. That position, that new position, has been particularly challenging. We've advertised it, Cody, help me out here, but I think twice, and not had any applicants either one of those times. And so that would be an increase for a senior water resource agent or a water resource agent. And so I'm not sure why we're not attracting applicants, but we have asked DHR if we could underfill that position with a senior water resource agent or water resource agent to try to perhaps expand the applicant pool. But we submitted that request to DHR months ago and have not gotten final word back from them yet. So I don't know whether we're going to be able to do that. But I think that one position may not have all of the impact that Mary is looking for, or all of us are looking for, but I think it might have some impact.
Well, it would certainly help, Shelley, and thanks for that explanation. That really drives home some of the problems that we all have, that you all have, sorry.
Al, this is Jeff. I'm wondering if we could take another approach. If somebody came in April and they needed something done quickly, could they go to a consultant, have the consultant do all the analysis that department staff is currently doing, bring a report of that analysis in with their application, and then all Mary and her number one helper would have to do is read that analysis or look at that analysis and see if it was accurate or not, and take that load off of our staff at a time when our staff is spread so thin as they are now when they have to go out in the field, and still expedite the process of getting a lease or rental approved.
Would we have to, I'll direct this to Brian and Mary, would we have to do anything, make changes to our rules that would to authorize that to happen, or is that something we could do outside of a rulemaking?
Yeah, so we wouldn't need any adjustment to language and rule to make that happen. I know that, and thank you, Jeff, for that question, that we did talk about this a little bit when we had looked at some different alternatives to pricing last year. And one of the most relatable processes that we currently have within the department that kind of works on that same principle is our certified water right examiner list for getting, water rights licensed. And so there is an opportunity to perhaps provide some criteria in addition to a rental application with what might need to be met in order to fast track that. But there is still some complexities with ensuring that what they're asking is going to be able to occur. And so it would be easier with some of our companion packages where the lessor is the same as the renter and they're adjusting some pivots on their farms and, the rental locations are pretty close, but we still have to perform an injury analysis regardless of how it comes in to make sure that we're not going to impact any other users during the term of that rental.
So some help, but doesn't eliminate the issue, right?
It won't get us there 100%. I think it would help us by 40% as far as processing time, but there's still going to be a lot of review of the work that's handed to us and that availability and that injury analysis to make sure it can work. And
So anyway, so Jeff, I think the question would be, is it all right to allow somebody to jump the line like that, for people who have been waiting? And I guess if they know that's what it takes to get it resolved, then maybe that's okay.
Yeah, Al,
Everybody knows.
I'm just looking for a process so that if somebody finds out in April or May they got a problem and they can use the water supply bank as a solution, that we can accommodate them. And I think you've had a few people contact you about needing something done very quickly to solve an unforeseen problem and not being able to get that accomplished. And I don't know what we would have to do, what we would have to require, what kind of authorization you'd have to have a consultant approved. But whatever the processes are that we have to go through to approve a lease and a rental, I don't think anything we do in the department's proprietary. If somebody could do all of that, and then all you had to do was review their analysis and make sure that they had come to the correct conclusion, it looks to me like that would help some of these last minute things get done without overtaxing our staff and especially putting additional load on what Shelley's trying to manage.
So if Brian or Mary, if we decide to do this, if the board, we decide to recommend the board to do this, what would be the process for establishing that procedure that Jeff's talking about?
I'll take a stab at that, Al. I think that first, we probably need some direction from the board. And maybe direction, here today would be enough to at least investigate, what kind of, to investigate that. I think then we'd probably want staff to draft up some, I wouldn't call them rules, obviously, but procedures. Yes, thank you, Mary. that we would be asking those external consultants to follow, and requirements for submittal of analysis. And then probably ultimately bring those back to you for your adoption.
So our next board meeting is January, right?
Yes.
So let me just ask the committee members, what do you think about Jeff's idea of at least getting the staff going on evaluating what we would need to do to establish this procedure? Because what Jeff is talking about has been something that we've discussed it in previous years, and we really haven't followed through with it as a board. So I think it's worth asking the question, but what do you all think?
Well, you're asking if we'd want to make that recommendation to the full board.
Well, yes, we
Just
obviously
how-
can't make a decision for the board, but I mean, I think what we would be doing would be asking the water board staff to come back with some information that we could then have in front of the board in the January meeting, rather than wait until January and then decide, and then direct the staff, and then wait until March and then adopt the rule, by which time it would be really too late, or potentially too late for people to adjust to those new, not rules, procedures.
Well, I think that's a good idea if we can get the information for January.
I think it's a great idea, particularly where we have the inability to fill that position we're trying to fill. We've got to figure out ways to try to accommodate. We all want to call them emergencies, but whether to expedite the process, I guess, is a better term than emergency.
So, how about the other board members? What do you all think?
That was Mark. I think it's a good
Yeah,
idea.
no, I got you, Mark. Joanne, Dean, Pat?
Well, yeah, I think it's a good idea, but I kind of wonder, we talked about having maybe in previous water supply bank meetings, having maybe a discount fee for people who put their permits in before November 1st. And I'm just throwing this out there. I'm not a water supply bank expert, but what if we had the ability to buy insurance water? We know 2024 is looking like a hot, dry year. If you had the opportunity to buy insurance water prior to November 1st to accommodate such examples of needing an emergency water right, is that a thing that could actually happen, or is that just creating more work for nothing?
So Joanne, what do you mean by insurance water? You pay for it and then get your money back if you didn't use it, or how do you anticipate that would work?
Well, you'd lose some of your money, would be at risk. You would lose it because you pay for insurance. You don't necessarily benefit every year, but it would be at a discounted rate, so that if you needed it, if you thought you might need it, you pay for it up front. And then if you do need it, you get the full benefit. If you don't, then you get some back, but you lose some. It still requires somebody to look at the application and review it. So I'm not sure it really addresses the labor cost.
No, Mr. Chairman, this is Dean. I'd agree with what you said and what Mark said there. I think let's bring some more information on that. As to what Joanne said, I think the one problem when you talk about insurance water going forward is usually the supplies and the needs come about that don't always match up. And so having been involved in a lot of water leases, I'm not sure that would, because you got to identify the supply that's out there. So I'm not sure the discount thing would work.
And that was the part I wasn't sure about. No idea is a bad idea, right?
This is Shelley Keene. Again, if I might address the board, Al and board members, this is a very challenging question. And I think, or I know it's important to all of us to get it right. And I think it's probably going to require considerable thought. Mary mentioned earlier the parallel that we have in department processes with the Certified Water Right Examiner program, where professional engineers or geologists who are certified by the department as understanding the water appropriation and beneficial use rules and having the technical understanding and skills to conduct beneficial use field examinations are authorized to do those examinations. That saves the department from having to send someone in the field to do that beneficial use field examination. And that does add bandwidth and helps us out. But as Mary mentioned, that doesn't completely relieve the department of all the review responsibility that we have. Our staff members still look at those beneficial use examinations that are submitted by certified water right examiners and make sure that all the information that we actually need to issue a water right license consistent with the beneficial use examination rules is provided. And quite often there's a lot of back and forth between the department staff member charged with preparing the license and the certified water right examiner who submitted that beneficial use field report. There's a lot of questions. And I would think that at least initially, until the examiners or consultants get used to the process and know what the department needs to see, that there would be a lot of back and forth. In the certified water right examiner program, we have a statute underpinning that, and then we have the beneficial use examination rules to refer back to, so that we can point to exactly what the department is going to need. And so I think we would need to take a hard look at whether it's appropriate to, and whether we need to have perhaps more robust rules. I hate to say that, knowing the experience that we've been through with the water supply bank rules. And also whether some certification process would really be valuable, similar to what we have with the Certified Water Right Examiner program. So those are just some questions in my mind and some thoughts about the process, that makes me think that this is going to require some evaluation. It may not be a quick and easy determination.
So Shelley, this is Al again. So between now and January, do you, whatever our next meeting date for the board is, the 19th, could you do that deep thinking, or is that something that's going to require more time than that?
I think we would like to have more time than that. But that seems like very short turnaround time, given the holidays in between and the legislative session starting and needing to be prepared for some of the things happening there, and just other things that we have pressing.
Well, it sounds like it doesn't make any sense to require something that not going to be the complete analysis that we would need to do this. If to the extent that we can, to the extent that you all can look at this, Shelley, and try to give us some updates as we move along, and as soon as you're ready, we can call another committee meeting. But I do think this is important, and we have talked about this in the past, and it would be really good to set up something like Jeff has proposed. And so I guess my recommendation for the committee members is that we let the department do their job and come back and tell us as soon as they're able. And if that means they can tell us something at the board meeting in January, great. If it's going to take longer, then we can convene another committee meeting. Comments?
That sounds good to me, Mr. Chairman.
Me also, Mr. Chairman.
That's fine with me, Mr. Chairman. This is Mark.
Sorry, Jeff.
We can, I think we can get the ball rolling a little bit on it. Based on what time staff can put into it without, getting in the way of all the other stuff.
Well, Al, I don't want to do something half-baked. I'm just looking out the window, and unless something dramatically changes in the next 90 days, I can see some urgency hitting Mary's desk in about April. And I don't know. If we can't do it for this coming season, I think we need to investigate it and put something in place. If we could offload some of this work on to the applicant and lighten the load of our staff and accomplish what we need to, I think it would be a good direction to move.
Well, and maybe, Jeff, it should be for all applications.
Yeah, why not?
Not just people who need immediate action. Maybe we should require more information up front. And I think that's something, Mary and Shelley, that we should look at.
Al, as someone who's worked in the water rights program for a lot of years, I am always in favor of more information being submitted up front with the application. That always is helpful. One thing that I can say, Jeff, just to remind folks, the last really dry year that we had, I think, was 2021. And that year, the director did make it a priority for water rights section staff to stay involved in the water supply bank past what we normally would, with the idea in mind that if there's an opportunity to get water to folks in a year when they really, really need it, that has to be a priority for the department. So there's always an option like that to look at as well. It's maybe not ideal vis-a-vis our other programs that we also have to address, but it's something that has occurred in the past, and can't speak for the director necessarily, but it's the kind of thing that we consider when those kinds of years are happening to us.
Well, Shelley, I think from what I'm hearing from the committee is that would be a really good idea. We would encourage the department to do what they can if we are entering another, heaven forbid, 2021 water year. I think we've probably done what we can do on that topic. Mary, do you have more information you want to tell us about?
I have loads more information that I would love to tell you about.
Oh, good. You got 15 minutes.
Yeah. The final comment I have about the calendar is just to remember that there are multiple different types of beneficial uses, which means there are different seasons of use. And so another reason why December and March are highlighted is because we have seasons of use that start January 1st. And so we have applications that come in ahead of their requested start date, but typically they come in between 30 and 75 days before they're wanting to start. And so there's a lot of leases and rentals that are all being concurrently trying to be reviewed for the same time frame. And so then we have additionally people applying after the season of use has already began for their rental request. And so they're coming in kind of late. And the final comment that I will make on this is that, February, March, April are pretty heavy with the applications received and immediate requested start dates. And so if you're taking 70% of 100, that's a lot of applications that you're processing in 3 months. This next slide is complexities with rental applications. These are just some areas, some trends that I've noticed or some variances that we can consider when we're looking at rental applications. But top left is beneficial uses. Irrigation, by far the most requested in 2021. We also had some mitigation by non-use. We had industrial use, and of course, municipal groundwater recharge and some storage. So I like showing this one for 2021 because there was a lot of different types of beneficial uses requested in 2021. The top right is percentage of rental applications requiring ESPA modeling. So we had almost 40% of rental applications received during 2021 were groundwater in the Eastern Snake Plain Aquifer. And so this required additional analysis. It also requires the applicant to know the quantity of water and the water right number that they're going to be renting from so they can provide that modeling. And so there's there's a lot of accounting on both sides, both from the applicant and representative side, and then on our side within the department, because what may be true for availability on November 15th may not be true December 15th. So numbers are constantly changing and we're making adjustments. And then our bottom left is a pie chart and expansion for rent beneficial uses, but for a change in nature of use. So this is where, for example, the 29% for irrigation, 29% of these applications needed the water for irrigation, but the water right that was leased was for a different beneficial use. And the other big portion of it was 25% for mitigation or mitigation by non-use. And those are typically within for irrigation areas also. 17% was for industrial use. And those are the largest slices of the requested change in nature of use. And this can occur either because the owner of the right is also the renter and they need to change some practices. For example, they want to change some of their dairy operation or from pivot operation for agriculture into stock water dairy, something like that, where they're changing up. This can also happen where you have the only available water for lease for a new rental is a different beneficial use than what the renter needs. And so we would have to do a change in nature of use to make that water available. And then the bottom right table is groundwater management area rental applications in 2020, where you can see over 40 of those applications were within the ESPA. And then we had rental requests in the Bigwood River, the Raft River, and Mountain Home, and then Curlew and Banbury Hot Springs. So there is quite a bit of activity in different areas of concern for groundwater. And all of these would have to be considered in addition with those fast tracks that we were just speaking of in the complexities and what might hold applications up when considering all of these items. This table is as complex as it looks. It was a way to find out what the minimum rental rate would need to be in order to cover the deficit that year. So the amount charged per acre foot. I analyzed years 2018 through 2022. This is where you'll see that difference in the volume charged when I was talking about combined limits, where in 2018, you may have seen that there was 63,000 or 65,000 acre feet, but we actually charged 60,000 acre feet. And then up through 2022, a lot higher volume was charged, 73,000 acre feet. And this is actual, the analysis that went into this was line by line, how much water was actually allowed to be diverted in that year based on that rental. What did we charge them for? And what the admin fee was that we actually collected. So that's in the fourth column, the 10% admin fee that we keep. And then comparable to that is operating costs. And then what our deficit is. I don't have the line items in here for lease filing fees that we received. But what I did do was I took billed hours operating cost minus the lease fees we received, divided by the actual volume charged in order to find out what the minimum rate per acre foot would be if we wanted to meet the deficit only with a rental rate increase. And that comes out to a couple of different numbers depending on the year. So in the center of our chart, 10% admin fees to meet deficit. In 2022, it would have to be $32.50 an acre foot. Your 10% is $3.25 an acre foot in order to meet the deficit. Whereas it got really low in 2020, where you would only need $2.67 from your 10%, the $26.70 per acre foot in order to meet. And it got as high as in 2018, that was the year when operating costs were $304,000. We would have to charge $42.10 an acre foot to be able to meet that. And there's some rounding, it's actually just slightly higher. When I apply that rate back to the volume, I can do some different things. We can look at what the average is, which is the next column. If we did the average of $32.50 or $3.25, that's what the new revenue plus lease fees would actually be. And then you can compare that to operating costs. And then I also took the highest. So if you want to meet all years, no matter what, then perhaps it's best to charge the highest rate per acre foot that met the highest operating cost year. And that would be the $42.10. And then find out what the new loss gain is. So if we went with the average, that's our second to last column, we would have met the deficit in 3 of the 5 years, although 2022 is really coming in at only like a little over an acre foot plus side. But it's not meeting in years 2019 and 2018. If we were to apply the highest rates it would have met in all years. And again, because of that rounding, it would need to be slightly higher than $42.10. So, and then you can see the sum line for what that difference in revenue would have been for the 5 years. When you compare those two different alternatives for increase in the rental rate per acre foot.
So I'm going to ask a question. I don't know if Mary or Brian want to weigh in on this, but I think I'm going to pose this to the committee to think about, and that is, to me, I don't see a reason why the administrative fee has to be tied to the rental price. And if you were to charge an administrative fee of $3.50 an acre foot or $4 an acre foot, and people right now are already renting water on whatever it is rate, whatever their rate is, privately, and all we care about is getting our administrative fee. We could increase the rate, but I don't know why we have to increase the rate in order to get us our $3.50 or $4 or $4.50 administrative fee per acre foot. There doesn't seem to be a reason that it has to be 10% or any percent tied to the rental rate.
Al, I'll weigh in on that one. The 10% is set in rule. So what the board has discretion over is the rental rate, and then the rule says you get to keep 10% for administrative fees.
So we'd have to get legislative approval to change that.
To change the 10% percentage, correct. Now, as I say, you just increase the rental rate and then your 10% is bigger.
If we increase the rental rate, would we decrease the amount of water rented? If we changed it to $30 or $40, are we going to have less rental and therefore less revenue?
Thank you, Al. That is a concern to think about if we're going to lose some business due to an increase on pricing, how that may affect different individuals or companies in trying to make up that additional cost.
This is Mark. I'm sitting here thinking, if I'm sitting in the legislature and you bring me a proposal that says the 10% isn't covering our costs, but we hate to dictate the market rate of rental water and let free enterprise dictate the market rate, we need to adjust the rule to set the fee at $425 or $450 a foot, regardless of the rate. I kind of think that's an easy sell, but maybe it's not. I do realize it takes going back to the legislature with the rule package,
which we couldn't do until next year anyway. Anybody else have any thoughts on pricing? I mean, is it something that we should think about, is to say, well, we know what people are charging, at least in the ESPA, for water. I mean, people wanted $100 last year or 2 years ago. Pat's
Mr. Chairman, this is Dean. I don't think if you raised it to $50, it's going to have any effect on the volume in the water bank. That's just, having been in there, the people need it, they need it. And depending on what so you could raise the fee or raise the rate. I don't think it's going to change your volume.
Al, this is Jeff. If I'm reading this right, if you raise the rental price to $32.50 over on a 5-year average, we would be in the black. Certain years we wouldn't be, but on average we would be. And I think we need to look at this more of an average, and maybe Five's not the magic number, but so that'd be 3250. I I don't think that's out of line. You might lose the 9 acre feet in that one basin, but the rest of it I think is pretty solid leases and rentals.
Yeah, from what I've seen in prices these days, 3250 is relatively cheap. Pat's been buying some water. Would you like
I
some
have been.
250 water?
No, I agree with everyone that the cost isn't going to dictate the demand. I think the demand's dictated by the availability of water. And if it's necessary, I'm preparing an application for a water right rental, and the volume of material and information on there leads me to believe that just the reviews are an expensive process, and we need to get that squared. I guess to reiterate, I don't think that if we change the cost of renting water, that it's going to have any effect on the demand.
So do I hear a consensus that we would recommend to the board to increase the rental rates to 3250 an acre foot?
I would agree with that.
Or should we do it all at once? Should we do it? I mean, it hasn't changed since how long, Mary? 2010?
No, this is the rental admin fee. So it just increased in 2023 to $23 an acre foot. It's been incrementally increasing each 4 to 5 years based on the NESPERS term sheet.
Oh, that's right. So we have 23 through 30 at $23.
Correct.
Should we increase it incrementally, 23 through 30? For let's say 23, and then next year 25, the next year 27, the next year 30, the next year 32. Doesn't get us quite to the 3.25, but gets us a lot closer. Or do we just say 24 on, that should be 3250? Any thoughts on that approach?
Al, this is Jeff. I think I would just raise it. I mean, you got to look at the other side of the coin. This isn't just about collecting administrative fees. This is being fair with those who are supplying the water in the bank. Right now, we're undervaluing what they're able to receive for their lease.
So would you do it for 2023 also, Jeff, or would you wait till 2024?
Well, what year are we in? I mean, we're through 2023. If we made a change in very
Oh,
soon,
you're right. Never
by
mind.
24,
Yeah,
right?
24. Yeah, I forgot we're done with 23. Yeah.
Yeah, it's okay. We're already processing 2024 rentals.
And so people have already paid their bills for 2024, right?
Correct. Anybody who had a rental that was already existing this year for next year have already paid their 2024 fees. And then we started approving new rentals that start for 2024. We just started approving those in November.
So we'd have to start in 2025 at 3250.
It would make it easier for me to do the accounting if you started in 25.
That would be my recommendation, Mr. Chairman, is that we have this kick in the next cycle.
Okay, so I'll entertain a motion to increase the rate to 30, or recommend to the board to increase the rate to 3250 beginning in the 2025 water year.
Mr. Chairman, this is Mark. I so move. It's one of those things that affects me least than anybody else because there's no water for me to rent.
Well, when we cloud seed, you'll have plenty.
That's right. We're gonna, but you gotta hit me the cloud first.
Is there a second? That would be Brian. Brian. You leave to go to the restroom?
I think so.
And Dale's our other member, right?
Yes, that's right.
So am I allowed to second the motion? We don't
I
have.
think you are.
Well, since it's merely a recommendation and not an action, let's go ahead and make that recommendation to the board. Since both Mr. Gibbs and I agree, and I think I've heard Mr. Olmstead's sentiments in the past, so
Mhm.
let's do that. And it's now afternoon.
Mhm.
And I know, Mary, you've got other things that we need to cover.
Yes, sir.
How much more time do you need? Because we've got another committee meeting starting at 1 o'clock.
I will try to wrap this up because I think all of us probably need to use the restroom within the next 10 minutes, but this is just rental fees and what are some different alternatives and rental application filing fees. Same thing that we did earlier where we were looking at lease costs with communication versus revenue. This is rental costs with research and development versus revenue, and then alternate methods of getting additional revenue where we talked about implementing we have in the past talked about implementing a rental application filing fee and what that could possibly be based on. And then some additional add-ons to rental application filing fees if we were to impose that at some point, and what those could be based on. And then we've talked about increasing the admin fee closer towards the bottom third of this for $32.50, which is kind of split on, some of the more rounding that I did for comparisons. And then also looks at minimum admin fee. I just want to insert here, I did also look at, but not completely dive into, alternative base rental pricing if we were to consider increasing the price within areas of concern. So you've talked about increasing the rental fee by $32.50, but you could always double the price in the ESPA and Big Wood areas because there's such a high demand, and possibly get more leases in because they would be getting a higher return. So you could possibly bulk up supply by increasing rental fees in areas of concern. And then this is just everything all together, lease fees and rental fees and their costs and what our bottom deficit is each year. And that's what we're trying to close currently.
So I'll ask the question for those of you in the ESPA and the Big Wood. Do you think that people are not putting water in because they don't get enough out of the rental rates?
This is Pat. That may be the case, but I doubt it. I don't think that the cost comes into effect here. I think the water is more important than the minor amount that we charge for it. In my humble opinion.
Well, why don't we just move ahead with the recommendation for now, and we can make those adjustments later, I think. Let's see what we can do with this first step. Okay, any other questions for Mary on this? Okay, Mary, keep going.
That is it, sir. This is the end of it. My next slide just says questions, which isn't as much fun as looking at a spreadsheet full of numbers. I do want to just ask if there's any additional analysis that anybody would like done based on what I've looked at so far. I do have some assumptions in this worksheet where I wasn't able to get all years, or if there's anything else that this committee would like for me to look into besides working with water rights, water allocations for a possible fast track for rental applications. Is there any additional analysis that you would like?
So Mary, remind me, I know you have already said this, but what changes, what would be the process for changing the filing fees for the lease applications? Is that something we would be able to do with our procedures, or do we need a legislative approval?
Legislative approval, it's in rule.
Okay. Anybody have any appetite for legislative approval of increasing lease application filing fees? Hearing none.
Mark,
Go ahead, Mark.
I'd just as soon wait another 12 months.
Okay, all right. So with that, we have at least one recommendation for the board. Is there anything else, Brian, that we need to, you would like the board to, or the committee to deal with today?
Not from my end, Mr. Chairman. So we have one recommendation on the rental rate, and then we have some direction to staff to start investigating a fast track or a consultant information driven process.
Right, and I think that also would include the concept of increasing the amount of information required in all applicants, although Pat seems to be somewhat daunted by the application process as it is.
Through that.
So something from Shelley and his group would be, I think, very helpful. And again, we'll take it up when they're ready to propose it to us or give us some suggestions. And with that, unless there's further discussion by the committee or the rest of the board, we're ready to adjourn. Anything else?
Not from our end, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, with that, I will declare the meeting adjourned. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Mary.
Thank
Appreciate
you.
all the
Thank you.
effort that went into this.
Thanks, Mary. Thanks, Mr. Chairman.
Yes, we'll see some of you back in about 45 minutes.
All right.
Yes.